Hello everyone. What is everyone up to? Reading? I guess that is a stupid question. You're coming for more book reviews. That's what you're here for. Today, in celebration of the second season of this TV show premiering a couple of weeks back, we are reviewing The Great Hunt. The Great Hunt is the second book of The Wheel of Time written by Robert Jordan, and this is a book series consisting of 14 books plus a prequel. This book is within the epic fantasy subgenre, and I think this book plus the third book, which is called The Dragon Reborn, are the books that the second season of the TV show The Wheel of Time will be consisting of. So this review couldn't be timelier. I hope this review is useful for both the people that are keen to start reading a book, that just watched the TV show and want to read the books, and also for just the general audience that are used to reading books and want to see what I have to say about this one. Now, like I mentioned before on the review of the first book of The Wheel of Time that I have here on the channel, you can watch it here. The Wheel of Time is my favorite book series, and therefore I've read it all. And I've reread some of these books several times. However, I've never done a reread of the whole series. And so last year I decided to do that together with some friends, just read the books at their pace while I read other books. And so that's why I'm on the second book at the moment. Or I finished the second book already. But because of this, it means that my opinion of this book is not a fresh opinion. It's not an opinion of a first reader. It will be under the view of someone who has read it once and is now reading it again. So because of this, it might be a bit biased, but I will always try and remain as unbiased as possible and try to remain as objective as possible, even though that's impossible because it'll still be an opinion and opinions are subjective.
What?
And of course, because it's also my favorite book series, that will also play a role, so just take that into account when you watch my review, but let's dive into it. The Great Hunt was published in 1990 and continues the story right from after the first book. I'm gonna read you the premise, which basically is a synopsis of the back of the book or what you can find online. If you don't want to hear anything, if you think you're allergic to spoilers, then skip to this timestamp, but otherwise, here you go. The main story is about a group of young heroes, namely Randall Thor, Matt Cotham, and Perrin Ibarra, all Taviran who join Shinaran soldiers in a quest to get the Horn of Valere out of enemy hands. At the same time, Egwene Alves, Nynaeve Almiara, and Elaine Trecan go to the White Tower in Tar Valon to begin learning the ways of the Aes Sedai. Finally, in a distant land, a strange group of people start an invasion of the Western Coast. And we're back. Now that we've listened to all of that, which is not much because the blurb is quite small, let me just say that I will be saying spoilers for the Wheel of Time now, for The Eye of the World, and I will try to avoid spoilers of The Great Hunt. If I say any spoiler by accident, I will have a warning beforehand so you can avoid it and jump ahead. I should probably also let you know of how I rated the first book, so here you go. This is the rating for the first book. As you can see, overall is a 4.2. There are some 3s, there are some 5s there, but it's a strong 4. It's a 4 that is on its way to a 5. How did The Great Hunt fare? We'll see. Starting with the plot. The plot of this book is okay. It has some variations from the first book, which is a good thing. It makes it original enough, but aside from a few surprises here and there, it wasn't exactly amazing. In fact, if we grab the first 3 books of this series, and if we consider that a trilogy, this would be the middle book, and I would actually think it would have the middle book syndrome. But I mean, that is only related to plot. And thankfully, the series continues for many more books, and so a lot of things that are built up here are answered much later in the book, but that it creates a bigger payoff. This is a small spoiler, but still, spoiler warning. I noticed how Robert Jordan liked the idea of having the same structure of the team is together at the start, then they separate, they go in each other in other ways, and eventually at the end they all join for one big battle, and then the book ends. It's similar structure, and it happens for the first 2 books. Because of all this, and because there are still some good plot twists, I'm gonna give this category a 3 out of 5. What about our dear characters? I think the characters had some development, Not as much as I wanted, but still it was some. And I think this might be a bit confounded by my previous reads because I know the full extent of their development, so I want them to get there and I want to see that journey. So the books where a character isn't developed as much feels a bit slow for me in terms of character. And I actually think there are some side characters in this book that had more development than some of the main characters. And those, for example, Varen and Celine, they are both amazing. I really enjoy these characters, and I felt they had quite a lot of development in this book. And I think that most of their development occurs because they interact a lot with our main characters. But, for example, one of the main characters, and this is again a spoiler, Matt, doesn't get developed that much. There isn't much development from him aside from him wanting the dagger for the whole book and just being like wanting it so badly. In this book, for me, Matt is the most boring character. And it's just followed by Perrin. Perrin is a bit boring. There were still some parts that were interesting, but still. But then again, I only say this for this book in specific, because after I know they get interesting and I really love following them and seeing the trajectory. But in this one, yeah, they were a bit boring. But I mean, when I say they were a bit boring, it's not a bad boring. They were just like, oh, not much is happening with them. But it's still interesting all around because they are always with interesting characters that makes me keep wanting to read. So because of that, I'm going to give the character category 4 out of 5. And now world building. World building gets its praise not exactly for the same reasons as it did in the first book. While Robert Jordan was able to increase the depth of this world by adding some powers, and I don't mean powers by like magical powers, I mean powers in person or people that have power. And the author also deepened the world by giving more detail about things that happen in the world that make the world bigger than what we thought it could be. Again, this might be a bit of a spoiler, so you might want to skip, but when Rand and his crew travel to a parallel universe, and then they're explained that there are multiple universes where things didn't happen exactly the same, and there's this like string theory almost of the multiverse and things like that. That was amazing. It mixes science fiction and horror very well with the fantasy genre. And then later on, when they travel again through the travel stones or the portal stones and it malfunctions and suddenly they're reliving all these lives in different scenarios and see all these possibilities, it gives these existential anxiety. However, it's really well done because we were explained before how things work, or at least how things or how people think things work. And that's why we accept it as readers and we feel like it's dangerous what's happening. And of course, there's still some development of the magic system when we hang out with the Aes Sedai. A bit, not as much as I want, because that's probably one of my favorite parts of this series, but still, it was a good amount. So for me, this category also gets a 5 out of 5, and it gets it because it's a bit of an outlier compared to the first book. It's different in its style of world building, but it makes sense and it's weaved very seamlessly, I would say. As for writing style, this is a bit intertwined with world building and with the plot parts, because even though the plot is a bit basic, in my opinion, the pacing of it was very well done, and I didn't feel bored even in the slower parts. I might have found some characters boring, but the story wasn't at all. And as I mentioned in the world building, Robert Jordan was able to join the science fiction, the horror, and the fantasy into this book in an amazing way because it was seamless and it allowed me to live this experience through the characters and this horror almost. Of course, the writing itself might be the most crucial component for you, and for that I have to say that Robert Jordan does like its descriptive prose, so you can expect a lot of descriptions. It's not simple, and I can understand that may not be for everyone. I enjoy it, but I can imagine you might not. So there's that. And this category might be a bit subjective. Again, I think if you listen to the audiobook, you're able to get through those descriptions easily, or not easily, but easier, and it can be more bearable. But for me, this is a 5 out of 5. Excellent work. And our last category, enjoyment. This is probably where my bias is the strongest, because you can guess already what my score will be. But before I announce it, I'll just say that I was always entertained reading this book. And it is a completely different enjoyment when you're rereading because you catch all the foreshadowing, you understand all the prophecies are saying, and you know what the critical points are for what the characters are going to go through. And that's partially, or I would say mostly even, what makes me want to read this series more and more and wants me to finish the whole series. It's because of this enjoyment I get from knowing how things will happen and wanting the characters to get there. So, of course, for me, it's a 5 out of 5. Even though all the categories aren't perfect, the enjoyment and the keenness on reading this was a 5. And that is all for The Great Hunt. I'll put a summary somewhere of both books so you can compare the scoring I gave for the categories. And as you can see, if you compare with the first book, there is a slight improvement, although most of the categories stayed more or less the same, even though they stayed the same but for different reasons, as is the case of the character and plot categories. The key category here will be the writing style, which rose from a 4 to a 5, and therefore it helps the total score, go from a 4.2 to a 4.4. It's a slight increase, it's still a 4 technically, but it means that the book got a bit better compared to the first one, and its potential to hit 5s just increased a bit more. I mean, if it got one more point, then it would go to 4.5. We can round that up to a 5, possibly. But we'll see what the next books reserve us. So let me know what you think. Would you give different ratings for any of these categories? Do you think this book is awful and you disagree with me? Comment down below. We're here to share opinions, right? So do that. For the new people, welcome. Subscribe, drop a like, and I will be seeing you soon, all right? Adeus.